I need you to hate so I can use you for your energy.
This is Real Sales Talk. Real sales advice from real sales practitioners. Giving you tips on how to dominate your sales quota are your co-hosts Sean Mitchell and Phil Keene. What's going on, everyone? Sean here. We are live with episode 2 of season 7, and we've got Daniel Disney on the line. I can't help but think you probably have some sort of relation to Walt Disney, maybe?
Do you know what? I gave a keynote today, and at every slide, every time I deliver a speaking session, the first thing I always say is, unfortunately, no relation to Walt Disney, or at least not that I'm aware of, anyway.
Right. Maybe some long-lost cousin somewhere is connected to Walt.
There's got to be.
Well, Daniel, thanks so much for being on. We're really excited about having you on as our guest. You know, I've been following you for a little while on LinkedIn and actually on Instagram as well. And I really have enjoyed what you've been doing on LinkedIn in particular, and a lot of the sales content that you've been putting together, both there as well as the dailysales.net blog that you've got going on. Today's topic is cold calling versus social selling. So let me just start off. Let's just get right into it, Daniel. Cold calling and social selling, get into a boxing ring. Who wins?
Oh, that's a good one. Do you know what? My side, I'd have to go with social selling, and it's tough. I would probably have said it was a draw, but to stay off the fence on this one, I would say so.
I'm torn. I see the value in both. We talked about this just briefly before we hit record. I see the value of both. Both are very much alive, but you've seen this discussion on LinkedIn, right? So you've got some of the more traditional sales authors and trainers who are pro cold calling. Like, you got to do it. You got to make it a habit. But then some of your new sales thought leaders are saying cold calling is inconvenient. It's interruptive and annoying to people receiving the phone calls. So how do you make sense of that? Like, you wrote a LinkedIn article actually a few weeks ago, The Harsh Truth About Cold Calling. So how do you personally feel about it? Because I kind of gather based off of your articles that you've actually experienced quite a bit of success by cold calling.
Yeah, you know, I wrote 2 articles probably about 2 months ago. One was how I managed to achieve a £1 million sale through social selling with no phone calls whatsoever. And so that was a real pro social selling site. It was a real success story that I had. It was great. And obviously I got a lot of backlash from people sort of claiming that cold calling was, you know, still very much thriving. So I was fortunate enough to be able to refer back to another very similar size sale that I got through cold calling.
Yeah.
And again, with no social, you know, I've posted on both parties. I've written plenty of blogs about cold calling and how to do it. I've been doing it for 10 plus years, and I've seen great success through it. And equally, over the last 3-4 years, have entered and gone really into the social world. And I guess the reason I said if they were to go into a boxing match right now, who would win? You know, my bet would be on social, because it is the future. So, you know, whilst it's pretty even now and we've got a pretty fair scale of cold calling success and social success, you know, the ultimate strength, the younger fighter, is social, who I think is going to be the winner, but certainly long-term champion.
Yeah, I mean, so I've given this a lot of thought. You know, been following what people have been writing about online. In fact, I saw a brief interaction between Jack Kosakowski and Mike Weinberg. Jack is very much pro social selling, and Mike Weinberg is the antithesis of you know, he's very much traditional. You got to pick up the phone, you know, hashtag one more call.
Hashtag one more call. I love that one. Yeah,
exactly. As their group that Mike runs with promotes. So I think that, like, if I were to answer my own question, cold calling and social selling get into a boxing match, who wins? I think I'd actually take the other side right this very moment. I think cold calling wins, because I think your senior level decision makers at most companies, I mean, not mentioning like startups, you typically tend to have a younger executive, but I mean, let's that aside, look at your Fortune 500 and your Fortune 100 companies. What are their ages? They're most likely 40 and above, right? They're the Gen Xers and older who are signing off and making these decisions. So I think if I were to answer my own question, I would probably say cold calling. Now, if we're talking about a marathon, it's going to be social selling. So some of the things that you wrote in this particular article, the harsh truth of cold calling, I like some of the things that you talk about here. Some of the things that you preface the article with. So there's 4 things that I think would be kind of interesting for you to kind of expound upon. So the first one is, you've got a lot of experience in cold calling, and I'm actually curious to get your background on how you got into sales. This might be a good opportunity to do that, and how cold calling has influenced that career from when you first got into now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the moment I went into sales was 2 weeks after my first job. So I was 16 and I worked at a local DIY store. First job I applied for and got it straight away. They put me on the tills. 2 weeks on the tills, and the showroom manager who looks after kitchen sales, bathroom sales, comes over and says, I think you'd be really good selling. 2 weeks, I'm put straight into kitchens, put through sales training, design training, and I was there for 2 years, top seller, all whilst doing it part-time. I was beating the full-time salespeople on my small little part-time weekend hours whilst I was at college, and that was my fast track into sales, into the world of sales. So, that was retail sales, loved it. Couple of jobs down the line, I sort of went into more corporate sales, and that was where I really started to experience cold calling. I was in sort of IT education sales. So yeah, cold calling, 150, 200 businesses a day, struggling to get through to decision makers, battling gatekeepers. Now, I wasn't fortunate enough to be put through training. It was very much an induction of, this is what you're selling, here's your data, here's a phone, and off you go. And being fair, well, for me, I like to learn myself. I'm kind of quite good at being chucked in the deep end, tend to thrive in that environment. But once I found my pattern, found how to do it successfully, found the most efficient ways to do it, the best ways to talk around gatekeepers, the best ways to get through to decision makers, to have good conversations with them. My passion then went into helping others learn those same things, because what I saw around me was people going through that same induction process, but struggling, and then moving on and moving out. So yeah, that's going to be my story from going into sales and going into cold calling. And then as the years went on, LinkedIn suddenly came into my life, and I found the world of social. And then certainly over the last 3 to 4 years, it's been an interesting experience of doing both. So using social to build brand knowledge, to build relationships, to start to understand my prospect companies and their structures, and use that to help enhance my cold calling to make them even more efficient. So I have to admit, going back to what you were just suggesting about cold calling still probably being the best right now, I would probably agree with you to some extent on that, because you're right. The majority, I'd say, of decision makers are still probably just wanting to use the phone. But as you obviously would have read in my article, it's that scale that is slowly tipping, where those decision makers are going to be replaced by much younger ones, and that's where it will change.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Daniel. I think as that leadership, the age of leadership starts to mature, those that are millennials who have really grown up with, I mean, they don't know anything else and I should say we, because I'm probably on the older end of millennials. I think like a millennial, and love the internet, prefer communication. But maybe I'm maybe I'm a split personality, because I also love getting on the phone, because I feel like I can sense the tone in someone's voice and listen to what they're not saying, or listen to what they're saying by tone instead of the words that are coming out of their mouth. But have you seen over the years, from when you first started cold calling to now, people's reception of cold calling change? Are people more receptive or less receptive of it now than they were when you first got in?
No, I think it has got a lot tougher. Certainly more recently, I think it is a lot tougher to get through gatekeepers. I think it's a lot tougher to get, decision makers on the phone. I think you're battling a much tougher battle than you were 4 or 5 years ago plus. So I think that, it is getting a lot more difficult. It's not to say it's impossible. And you're right. And I share that sort of, I much prefer to have a voice conversation, text, reading an email, reading an instant message. Sometimes you interpret it differently to perhaps, the way it was meant to come across. Words are very tricky, and, salespeople aren't always the most articulate writers. They're better at presenting and speaking. So yes, phone calls face to face certainly have a much stronger impact. Although for younger people, actually, if you do talk to them face to face or over the phone, it's not comfortable for them. They don't enjoy it. And actually, they're more responsive to an instant message or an email, or other forms of more modern contact.
Here's what I'm finding personally, as someone who has been in sales for over a decade. I think, and being a millennial and a modern person, I want things at my own convenience. And if I'm busy and I get a phone call from someone and I'm right in the middle of something, it in many cases is an inconvenience. And especially when I'm discovering and I'm trying to learn about a product, if I'm not ready to talk with someone and I just want to do research and get more information, when I have to talk with someone when I'm not ready, I get annoyed. And so I think that the reason, like if I look from the side of a social seller, the reason why that is going to become more prominent is because it's at the convenience of the consumer, right? It gives the power to the person the buyer, really. It gives the power to the buyer, and it allows them to control the timeline. And so, you stated in this article that you're a millennial. I totally get it. It makes sense to me. And that's kind of one of the driving factors, I think, behind why millennials don't want to talk on the phone, because they want it in their own timeline. So let's just kind of flip the script here and talk about social selling. You've got an impressive 22,000 followers on LinkedIn. You've got some fantastic articles. In fact, for our Real Sales Talk audience who is listening to this recording, if you're not following Daniel on LinkedIn, go do that now or by the end of this conversation. So you, I think of most people, in fact, the only other person that I can think of is Jack, who is doing such a great job at leveraging social, can speak to this in a very educated light. Why do you think social selling working so well for you?
So it's an interesting one. I'll tell you what really fascinates me is when I wear my buyer hat. So as a passionate salesperson who's been selling for years, become a buyer. So in my role, I lead a very large sales team, and I get approached and I get cold calls coming through to me every single day. But equally, I get social sellers coming through to me every day. And what I find quite fascinating, and it's why I take such a real vested interest into it, is because actually as a buyer, how do I react? Because I do not answer cold calls. I'm the one that's always.
Why is that? I'm curious to know. Why don't you answer cold calls?
Because I'm busy. Every time someone calls me, I am busy. I'm in the middle of something. To interrupt, well, I can't say I've ever had a cold call come through when I've actually been sat there not doing anything. And that's probably true to say for most buyers out there. it's intrusive. I'm busy. I have a lot to do in a day. So to take time out, takes me off track. So yeah, I never really answer cold calls, but equally, my LinkedIn messaging inbox is full every day with messages coming through. Can we talk about it? And I don't respond to that either. So I think when we talk about social success, and certainly the experience I've had at social success is, and it's a lot of people in both camps will argue the same thing. People that are bad at cold calling just aren't doing it right. And the people that are bad at social selling aren't doing it right. And that's probably a whole nother debate in the fact that we're not educating our salespeople correctly in how to utilize either tools. So it's a losing battle either way, because like we said, cold calling could be done very, very successfully right now, but you need to give them the right tools. Social selling could be equally successful if you give people the right tools on how to do it. When you just say go and do it, that's where the mistakes happen, and that's where pestering calls at bad times. And so for me, when I was cold calling, I knew that success would come if I spoke, phone people outside of working hours. If I'm going for a decision maker director, I'll phone them between 7, 8 in the morning or 6 and 7 in the evening. Doesn't mean I never get called at those times. I tend to get called at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and I'm well into the flow of my day at that point. So I kind of haven't really answered your question there, but sort of just broadened a bit of scope on how that buyer journey for me personally has certainly helped me better understand how I can, lead my teams or help when I write to help inspire people to do it properly. But going back to the question about social selling, how has it been a success for me? I think I'm quite lucky that I'm a creative person. So there's been a few articles or questions, should salespeople write blogs? And I'm quite fortunate to be quite comfortable in writing and creating content. And that's probably not true for all salespeople. There'll be a percentage. Doesn't mean that all salespeople should be writing, because for some of them, that's not their strength. Their strength may be on the phone or it may be face to face. Doesn't mean they can't learn it. But again, it's about giving them the right knowledge and tools. So I think I've been quite fortunate that I've understood social quite well. I can adapt quite quickly, and through writing and creating, it's helped me, get it right.
Yeah, I love it. So you don't take cold calls in most cases because you find that it's interruptive. What do you tell your sales team when they need to make cold calls, or do you have them make cold calls?
Yeah, so oddly enough, I do lead a telesales team, and they're making hundreds of cold calls a day. Story I'll always say, and it's the same for me as a buyer. So putting the buyer hat back on, if people phone me enough, I probably will answer. And I'll give you a real example. My mobile phone was due for upgrade, and my mobile phone provider phoned me 3 times a day, every day for 2 weeks. Most times, bad timing. I wouldn't answer it. I think after 10 or 11 days, I took the call. A good conversation. A couple of days later, I upgraded my phone. So the sale went through.
So were you appreciative of them calling 3 times a day for 2 weeks, or did you understand what they were trying to get at? And because you're a salesperson, they were salespeople. Did you have some mutual understanding there?
I think I probably had more patience than most people had. So yeah, I understood. I knew why they were phoning. Even on the phone call when they're using all the sales tactics that I know inside and out. It's quite different. Perhaps a different buyer to most. So yeah, I was probably more patient, but persistence does pay off, and that probably is the truth of cold calling success today. Like we said, it's a lot harder than it was before. You are having to go through a lot more challenges to get through to that person, but persistence does pay off. Hence why it's still a very much usable tool.
Regarding social selling, how would you define it? What's your definition of social selling? Because this is a relatively new phrase. When someone asks you that question, how would you define social selling? What would you respond with? 2 words: leverage and enhancement. So I say leverage because it gives you the opportunity. I did a talk today about the power of social media, and I had 3 images, and I said, look, you can go fishing. You can fish in a pond that's got 1 fish. You can fish in a pond that might have 100 fish, or you can fish in the ocean that might have millions of fish. Where would you rather go fishing that's going to deliver you the best odds of success and consistent odds of success? That's what social is. It's about leveraging your audience, growing an audience and leveraging it to create opportunities, maybe not directly, but with their audiences. It's that constant flow. And I say
enhancement, because at the moment, especially, and it probably will be for a long time, social enhances traditional sales activities, traditional sales processes. It's a tool that enhances. It's not a tool that's set here to replace it yet, but it's a massive tool of enhancement. You can research, you can build relationships, you can lay foundations. Every day I tend to meet people in person that I know through social. I go to meetings or pitches now, and they'll say, "Oh, I loved your blog the other day." I'm not going in as a cold person. I'm, may have had a phone conversation, but they know me. They know what I write. They know my values. There's a relationship there. That's a quarter of your battle already done. So leverage, enhancement, my 2 words for social.
I'll underscore that as well, that most of my friendships these days start online. I've met them on Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook. I've emailed. I went to the Outbound Sales Conference that Jeb Blunt and Mike Weinberg and Anthony Iannarino.
Yeah, I saw that. That looks really good. Yeah,
it was quite good, and you can gather kind of the thesis of what they talked about, which was outbound.
Hashtag one more call.
exactly. That hashtag was thrown around a few times over that day and a half. But those people I met online, virtually I met them, and when I met them in person, it was like, oh yeah, that's who you are, or that's great, good to meet you in person. So I think that there definitely is a value in putting yourself out there and creating content. I'm thinking from a salesperson's perspective, and this is something that you've written about as well. I'm curious to get your feedback. I haven't read the article, but should salespeople be creating content? Where do you take that, and how do you advise salespeople? I mean, our audience is sales reps and sales leaders listening to this podcast. So what's your advice to the salespeople listening to this recording, and what would be your advice to sales leaders when you get that question, should sales reps be creating content?
Yeah, well, I'll start with sales leaders. So, as with any leader, you've got a team of different personalities, different attributes, different skills. So you need to utilize the skills you've got. You will probably have very good writers in your team. You'll probably have good creative people that, and if it's a younger sales team, they're probably creating content, personally. So you will have tools within it. You might have others that are better at other things. So, best thing you can do is just look at who you've got and, use the tools you've got, and equally give people the tools. So you might have people that are interested in it, provide them the training and support, get them doing it properly. Don't just assume that they're going to be good at it or they're going to understand it. Maybe they did English when they were at school. That doesn't mean they're going to be good at writing, blogs or anything like that. So make sure you empower them with the right tools. Otherwise, you give them the wrong tools, they're not going to get the job done. And for salespeople, give it a try. Try writing. Read more, connect with thought leaders and influencers and writers, read the content and then try it yourself. Reach out, learn from them. You'll learn from the content that you read, but you won't know unless you try. Before I started blogging, I'd never written blogs before. The majority of my sales career, I'd never done anything on social. Probably the least social person at that point. And then 3 years ago, I gave it a try. I started using LinkedIn, enjoyed it. I wrote my first blog. Nothing to like the blogs I write now. It was a lot different, but I started and I grew and I learned and I developed. And, now I'm much better than I was back then. So yeah, if you're a salesperson, give it a try. And if you're a sales leader, look at the power you've got. A lot of sales leaders perhaps underutilize the potential they have in their teams through, social success and written and content.
I want to pose to you a couple of rebuttals that I can hear sales leaders and sales reps saying, giving reasons why they don't or shouldn't create the content. So from a sales leader's perspective, you're having sales reps create content without maybe their control, sales leaders' control or oversight, and so they might feel, what if the sales rep says something incorrectly, or what if they misrepresent the brand that I, the sales leader, am responsible for? So how do you respond to that, and how can a sales leader encourage sales reps to create content, but still have that element of, I'm responsible for this brand and I'm responsible for what this sales team produces?
So I'm doing this right now. So I have a few salespeople in my team at the moment who I'm empowering to go into the world of social. But at the start, I'm obviously teaching them, but I'm checking everything before it goes live. So I'm reading anything they write before they post it. I've given them very clear guidelines and suggestions and training. So a lot of what they come to go out is generally pretty good. But if I need to make any changes, if I need to perhaps reword the way they use the brand, or to make sure nothing's going to come back and bite us, then I can do that. So you can absolutely do that as a sales leader. You don't have to just let them, it's the same principle of, right, here's a phone book, off you go and do some cold calling. Hold their hand for the first few steps, then let them go off and do it. As soon as you know that they understand it, they know the boundaries, they know the do's and don'ts, then they can go off and do it, and you'll be fine with that. And then keep just checking in. You don't have to just let them go off and.
Yeah, I think I think you're right, Daniel. I think that's a training issue. I think with guidance and oversight, just like when you're teaching someone how to pick up the phone and make phone calls to represent the company and talk to these decision makers, the same thing goes for creating content as well. With guidance and direction and training, I think it is possible to do it representing the company the way that they should. To the sales rep, I can hear the sales rep saying, I have no clue where to start with creating content and quote unquote social selling. What's your advice to them?
All that information is at a few clicks away. That's the beauty of it. Create a LinkedIn account, you probably have a Facebook account, create Twitter, and connect with the right people. Just look at your industry. Like you say, there are so many people out there that are writing content and they're just giving that information away. A lot of my blogs will help you understand how to write successfully. I wrote a blog 2 weeks ago, how to write a viral blog on LinkedIn. Generally we just give that information away because it's what we're passionate about. So reach out. People send me messages asking about stuff like that. I'll always reply to those sort of messages. So that, reach out and ask for help if you haven't got help internally, if you haven't got people internally that can show you how. That's the beauty of social media. Connect with people, find those sort of thought leaders or the people that have had success in doing it, and look at the content they're doing and ask them questions. What systems do you use to create the images? How do you choose a title? How do you write it? Again, my first blogs were horrendous compared to what they are now, but I learned, and that's how I learned. I had no one showing me. There was no one in my office, no one in my network when I started that helped, but it was only through following people. Back then it was Tony J. Hughes, obviously, still a fantastic sales blogger, but 3 years ago he was sort of in quite early stages as well. So, watching what he did and how he wrote, and that influenced me. It's the same as a musician. Young musicians are influenced by older musicians. I think there could be one more barrier that a salesperson, and I get it quite a lot, and that's about time. A lot of salespeople say, how do I have time? That time I could spend writing, I could have made 10 calls, 20 calls, whatever it may be. And time set, and it's the same for the sales leader. I get a lot of sales leaders that come to me and say, look, I don't want my sales reps sat on their phones all day or sat on social media sites all day pretending to be social selling. How can I measure it? How can I know they've done anything productive? How do I know they've progressed any relationships just because they've shared a blog? What does that mean? That's not an opportunity. That's not pipeline or forecast. It's very soft stuff. Now, managing social media is a big challenge in the industry at the moment, and I think we'll see more and more stuff done around that. But certainly from a time perspective, as with any sales activity, it's just about managing your time effectively. I created my following, I created the Daily Sales, all while having a full-time sales or sales leadership role. So it can be done, and whilst still hitting and exceeding targets. This is not, at the cost or expense of any of that. I work very hard to make sure that I can do stuff like this because it has allowed me to create more opportunities and enhance and make my processes more efficient. So, manage it properly. And if you're a sales leader, you almost have to be able to appreciate the investment, but do manage it closely because it can easily become quite a hollow task. I've seen a lot of salespeople write content that doesn't do anything, and they might spend 2 hours doing that and it does nothing. That is 2 hours wasted, unfortunately. So you do have to guide people to make sure that the time isn't spent, but it's invested, and then you'll see long-term benefits.
That's fantastic. Let's get really tactical, Daniel. I want you to talk maybe 2.5 minutes on cold calling and 2.5 minutes on social selling for someone who has never done cold calling. They're very comfortable online in conversing and communicating online, but they're not so comfortable or don't really have as much repetition and develop the repertoire of cold calling. Where would you advise that they start? In addition to your blog, that was probably the first thing that you would suggest as to where someone would start to get some help with cold calling. But what's your advice on where that person should start to help develop those muscles of conversing and conversating in real time and asking for an appointment and so on?
Yeah, the biggest challenge in cold calling is fear. You know, a lot of salespeople are scared of picking up the phone. They're scared of rejection. They might not want to admit it, but it's that fear that stops them making as many calls or making good calls or the way they talk. So the first thing I would do is to help overcome that fear is just be really clear on your purpose. Why are you phoning? What is the outcome you're after? And you have to believe in it. You know, find that belief, find that passion, set those boundaries. So, you know, right, this is what I need to talk about. This is why I'm doing it. This is why I want to talk to you. Find that confidence. You know, the next thing is practice makes perfect. So the more you do it, the better you get, the more comfortable you get. I think it's wise for sales leaders to help encourage that first step, you know, push them through. It's like learning to ride your bike, you know, hold the bike for a bit, let them get comfortable, let them build a bit of confidence, and then let them go off. The more they do it, it will become second nature. The biggest challenge is that first step, those first few pedals, that fear of falling over. So provide them the guidance, give them the stabilizers of belief in the product, you know, knowledge and confidence in what they're trying to achieve. Help them with those first, you know, number of calls, and you know, off they go.
What's your opinion about role playing? Do you think that prepares the sales rep enough to no?
being brutally honest, and it could just be a personal thing, I really don't see the big value in role playing. I think it might, maybe it's a bit of fun, maybe it's a tick box exercise. Personally, I've not found value in it, and neither have, you know, the people I've worked with. I've not felt it's benefited them because it's too far away from the real experience. It's too acted. There's too many other variables influencing it that when you do get on the phone, it's really hard to make any connection. So I'm more for, you know, listening, shadowing, let them listen perhaps to live sales calls with experienced people, you know, and then support them in making their calls. But yeah, not a big fan of role play.
Love it. Yeah, great feedback. I like that it's not just a no, but it's a no because, and here are some alternatives. So on the social selling side, so where does someone start? You're a sales rep. You've had relative success picking up the phone and getting face to face with people, but maybe see value in expanding that network and expanding that opportunity to generate business. Where does someone start? Tactically speaking, where does a sales rep start to begin that journey of creating content, providing value with social selling?
Well, the first place you start is your profile. That's going to be the first place your prospects, your customers are going to look. And it's the easiest one. Just have good, solid profiles. Whatever platforms you're going to use, whatever networks you're going to use, just invest a bit of time. Make sure you have a profile that attracts buyers, not a profile that's trying to get you a job or trying to make you look cool or whatever it may be. It's got to be that if a buyer was to look at your profile, they trust you, or they can start to trust you. So first step, build a good profile. And then, you know, then it's about growing your network. So start following and engaging with your prospects, but start following and engaging with other people in your industry. So it's a take knowledge, give knowledge, but it's all out there. So, you know, the more proactive you are reading, sharing, once you've got quite a good taste of what you like to read yourself and what your industry, your target sector likes to read, then you can start to look at creating your own content. I wouldn't do it unless you've really looked at the type of content that's already popular in that industry. So what type of titles, what type of format, what type of images, Then you can start to play around with creating your own content. If it's early stages for you, get people to check it. Could be your manager, could be a colleague, could be someone in marketing, whoever it may be. Get people to cross-check it, because it could be a spelling mistake. Little things like that have a big impact on social audiences. So, take a bit of time, take it step by step, but it will grow. And the last tip on social is consistency. So if you're going to go into it, do it right and do it consistently. Don't do a day and then not do it for a week. If you're going to do it, make sure you fit it in and plan it in every single day. You could do 10 minutes first thing in the morning, 10 minutes at lunch, 10 minutes at the end of the day. It's more than enough time to, click, share, engage. Maybe you set half an hour aside to write something but do it consistently. Those gaps will disengage your audience.
Where does content curation come into play for the sales rep? And would you consider that social selling as well?
Absolutely. And certainly in that early stage, I think before you start to create content, you should curate content. So share and engage. And it's a great thing. Social is a lot about ego. And, you've got a buyer, prospective buyer. Social allows you to stroke their ego. It allows you to like their blog. Someone likes my stuff. That's a massive pat on the back for me if someone likes something I've written. I've poured my heart into something. I've, poured my opinions, and someone likes it, and then they comment and they share it with their network. That's a massive thing for me. I love that. And imagine that's what your buyers are going to feel. So if they've written something and you like it and you say, man, that was a great post. I love that. I loved your point about this. Wow, your prospective buyer's going to think, I like this guy. And then, oh, he's engaging with a lot of my content. I really like this guy. Then they're going to start liking your content. So, do share and engage content, whether it's prospective content or content that's going to offer value to your prospect. So, you've identified they're in an industry. Well, here's some popular news. Here's some interesting news articles. I think you're going to like this. Share it, curate it, but just make sure it's content that's going to offer value, not just for you, but for the people you're hoping to sell to.
Yeah. So one more question on the social selling, and I'm spending a little bit more time on the social selling side because I do think it is the new kid on the block, and especially for people that are my age and older, this may be complete new territory, whereas the picking up the phone, the cold calling thing they've heard for decades. Different buyers are on different social platforms. How do you recommend sales reps identify where they should be spending their time? What platforms they should be spending their time on? What advice would you give to that as to how they would assess where they should be at?
I mean, that's the thing. It's all down to research, and that is essentially where social really enhances the sales process. It allows you to do that research. So yeah, look at your industry, look at your prospective buyers, what networks are they on, and look, each network is massively different. LinkedIn is a lot different to Twitter. It's a lot different to Facebook, which is a lot different to Instagram and Snapchat. They're all their own beasts, and it's very challenging for a salesperson to be an expert in all of them. But obviously for you in your industry, just find what's most popular. It may be that it's Twitter. So look at your buyers. I mean, that's the beauty of LinkedIn. You can say, right, this is my prospect company. Great. LinkedIn's going to show you all their employees. Right. Fantastic. There's their pages. Look at the type of content. They might be sharing content from Twitter. Search their profile on Twitter. See where they're most active. They probably have profiles on all platforms, but what are they using the most? What are they engaging with the most? So, spend a bit of time researching. You'll learn a hell of a lot about your prospects in that time. You'll start to learn a lot of what their interests are, what they're doing, what's happening in their roles. You'll start to build a bit of a strategy of thinking, right, okay, I've identified that Twitter's where most of my prospects are. So now I know that's where I need to spend time investing in understanding it, as a social active person. And then that's where I can start to better utilize those tools.
Love it. Absolutely. So we're going to wrap up with some rapid fire questions that we like to ask when we interview people to get into the mind of top performers and top sales leaders. But before we do that, I want to give people an opportunity to go and connect with you. So where can they go and find you if they want to connect and follow you, follow your content, and learn more about you?
Yeah, so for me, I'm most proactive on LinkedIn. So please do connect with me on LinkedIn or follow my page. I tend to write 2 two blogs a week. And the daily sales is my page that I created, and it's sales content every single day. Funny sales memes, inspiring sales quotes, and blogs both written by me and some of the best sales experts, across the globe. So please do follow the page every single day. New content coming out.
Awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate you being on, Daniel. All right. So we're going to jump into the YouTube exclusive content. So if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, do it. We actually just passed 300 subscribers. So that's
wow.
We're
that's
excited.
Really good.
It was a couple of months ago that we were at 100. So we really have been trying to put a lot of value, unique value on our YouTube channel. So go and subscribe to that so you can listen to the remainder of this interview where we go into rapid fire. Okay, so the first question, Daniel, who inspires you? This could be personal or professional. Who's the first person that comes to mind when you talk about someone you draw on for inspiration?
Two people. First one, probably the most predominant one at the moment, is a guy called Lee Bartlett, author of #1 bestseller. And wasn't before, but I've been fortunate enough to read his book and meet him and spend a bit of time with him. And he is probably one of the most driven, smartest sales minds I think exists on the planet at the moment. Massively inspirational, massively focused.
I've seen you talk a lot about him on LinkedIn, and I haven't had the good fortune of meeting him digitally or in person yet, but I look forward to that opportunity. He seems like a really down-to-earth, friendly guy.
No, he really is. I'll make an introduction for you.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that. All right. So second question is, you seem like a person who is very disciplined. You're producing two pieces of blog content a week, as well as managing a sales team, as well as speaking on stage. What's your routine look like? Do you have any things that you do consistently every morning or maybe every evening or somewhere in between that wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, you make sure and get in your day?
So social is probably the most consistent thing, for me personally, for the daily sales, for everything I do. So in the morning, I like to check all my profiles, engage, look at messages, and then I'll have a touch point at various parts of the day. And then at the evening tends to be when I write, and I plan and I schedule my content. Again, like you mentioned, I have a full-time job. I have a massive page, family. So I have to be very precise with the time and how I allocate it to make sure I get that right balance, and balance is key. But yeah, social all throughout, because I'm passionate about it. I love it. I enjoy it. And it's what's creating most of my opportunities today.
Fantastic. I love it. How do you continue to grow yourself? You're producing a lot of content. Where do you draw most of that inspiration from? Are there any podcasts that you would recommend to our Real Sales Talk listeners, or maybe some books that you draw on often?
Well, obviously, Real Sales Talk is one of the best podcasts out there. But I also like to listen to The Brutal Truth of Sales with Brian Burns. He really, again, is a very much down to earth. He sees right through the sales industry for what it is, and through all the fluff. His interviews are very constructive. I thoroughly enjoy listening to him. Anthony Iannarino is a great, In the Arena podcast. Anthony Iannarino is probably one of the very intellectual sales minds out there. So he really pushes some of the sales thought leaders, past a lot of their boundaries. It's really good information, and that is where I get a lot of my inspiration. It's listening to blogs that you do, listening to the other blogs that I listen to, and I will be sat there. I'll be driving, and someone will say something, and in my head, a blog title will appear. And I'll have to pull over and scribble it down, or make a mental note to myself and write it when I get to my destination. So, and reading books. I mentioned before Lee Bartlett's #1 bestseller, fantastic book. I've got a whole stack of books I'm reading through at the moment. There are just a ton of great sales books out there, and it's reading that you then sort of highlight, bookmark. Something will come in, that's a really good, that inspires me to write something off of that, off of that theme.
Incredible. Well, Daniel, thanks again. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on and sharing knowledge. This I think is the first time we've talked about this topic of cold calling versus social selling. We had Jack come on and talk about social selling and touch on these things, but this has provided massive insight, I think, to me, and it's actually been good to dialogue about this with you, because I'm a little bit more defined as far as where I stand on the issue. I think, I think I agree with, the big, long-standing champion is definitely cold calling, with social selling making a strong entrance in a strong case. And as the quote unquote buyer persona changes, that buyer or that ideal customer becomes gets into leadership. Those millennials get into leadership. I think that social selling, I think convenience and being all about the buyer in providing value and on their timeline is going to be more and more common. So look forward to continuing the conversation here over the next several months on what this topic is going to evolve into. I think we'll start to hear more about social selling and how it's the preferred method for salespeople. So
what would be great is if everyone who listens to this or watches this, share this, comment and put your opinion in it. Are you pro cold calling? Are you pro social selling? What are your thoughts? Tag us in it, because we can take this debate off of this interview as well. And I think it'd be great to pull in as many people who are going to listen to watch this, share this debate across the world, because it's everyone's opinions. It's very interesting. And it's, that's what's helping shape the future of the sales industry.
Love it. That's the question of this episode. Cold calling and social selling get into a boxing ring. Who wins? So if you're listening to this, hop online and go and follow Daniel Disney and respond, or go find the article or the episode online and comment. Add your comments. Who wins that if they get into a boxing ring? So thanks, everyone. Appreciate you tuning into Real Sales Talk. By the way, big shout out to some of the countries that are like on the come up listening to Real Sales Talk. We've got like people in Denmark and Australia and the Philippines listening. So thanks, everyone who are outside of the United States and the UK that are tuning in to Real Sales Talk. We want to provide more value. So if you've got some ideas on some topics, please feel free to reach out. With that said, we'll see you on the next episode.